The day you both stop contacting each other, something shifts. Not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply. And if you misunderstand this moment, you will lose more than just her attention. You'll lose your position. Stay with me, because near the end of this conversation, you're going to understand why silence between two people is never empty. It is full of meaning. And if this resonates with you, quietly like this video and subscribe, not for algorithms, but because these conversations are the ones most men were never taught to have. When communication stops, most men feel one thing first: anxiety. You check your phone more than usual. You replay the last conversation in your mind. You wonder, is she thinking about me or is she moving on? But here's what very few men realize. When both of you stop reaching out, the dynamic resets. And that reset is not passive. It is psychological. Silence creates space. Space creates reflection. Reflection creates clarity. But clarity does not always work in your favor unless you understand what is happening beneath the surface. When you stop contacting her, she does not immediately forget you. In fact, quite the opposite often happens. The sudden absence of your presence forces her brain to fill in the gaps. Human psychology is wired to assign value to what becomes uncertain. Certainty feels safe. Uncertainty feels important. When you were consistently reaching out, initiating, checking in, she didn't have to wonder about your position. She knew you were there. But when you both stop, now there is tension, not conflict. Tension. And tension is where attraction either grows or collapses. Here's the truth most men struggle with. If your connection was built only on your effort, then silence exposes that imbalance. But if it was built on mutual emotional investment, silence amplifies curiosity. Women process absence differently than men. Men often experience silence as rejection. Women often experience silence as information. She begins asking herself questions she didn't have to ask before. Why hasn't he reached out? Is he okay? Is he pulling away? Does he still care? And here is where the real game begins. Not manipulation, not tactics, but emotional positioning. Because in silence, the person who feels more anxious usually loses composure first. If you break the silence out of fear, you communicate something without saying it. I am uncomfortable without reassurance. If you hold silence calmly, not as a strategy, but as grounded self-control, you communicate something else entirely. My world does not collapse without constant validation. That energy is felt even through a screen. But let me gently challenge you. Silence is powerful only when it is authentic. If you are using it to punish, to test, or to provoke reaction, it will backfire. Emotional maturity cannot be faked long term. This phase when neither of you reaches out is not about ego. It is about emotional balance. And balance reveals who is more dependent on momentum. So if you are in that space right now, do not rush to fill it. Observe it, because what she does next and what you feel next will tell you everything about the true foundation of your connection. Now, let's dive deeper into what is actually happening in her mind when contact stops. When a woman suddenly experiences your absence, her brain doesn't just register silence as emptiness. It registers it as information. Every pause, every day without a message is like a clue. Women are wired to observe patterns, to interpret behaviors, and to assess emotional consistency. And absence becomes a message louder than words. She may replay your last interactions in her mind, analysing the tone, the timing, the words you used. She asks herself, did he mean that, or why did he say that? Every interaction now carries weight because it's one of the last memories she has of your connection. Your silence amplifies that weight. Here's where it gets subtle, but crucial. When you both stop contacting each other, the mind starts filling in the gaps with emotion rather than logic. She might feel a sense of loss before she even realizes it. She might notice your absence in small ways, a favorite habit, a shared joke, a voice she misses. The brain is primed to attach significance to what is suddenly gone. Men often misread this. They think silence equates to she's over it or she's moved on. That's rarely the case. The emotional work is just beginning quietly, internally, without any visible signs. She's not calling, not texting, not signaling, but that doesn't mean she isn't deeply processing. At the same time, this is a mirror for you. Silence doesn't just affect her, it tests your own emotional resilience. Most men are trained to seek reassurance, to fill voids with action, to chase outcomes. But in this quiet, you learn whether your sense of self is dependent on external validation or rooted in your own presence. The most powerful men, and the men who women notice, are not desperate to fill gaps. They don't scramble for answers. They observe, they reflect, and they remain grounded. Your calm and absence communicates more than words ever could. There's also a fascinating psychological tension that develops here. Humans are naturally drawn to what is uncertain. When contact ceases, the certainty of your presence disappears, and the mind-seeking resolution can't help but gravitate toward figuring it out. She may start noticing patterns she ignored before. Your consistency, your reliability, your qualities that went unnoticed when life was too comfortable. But this only works if the silence is intentional in its integrity, not in its manipulation. If you use it to control or punish, she senses it, and the tension flips from attraction to frustration. Authenticity is non-negotiable. So in these quiet days, something extraordinary is happening. She's reflecting, wondering, and emotionally recalibrating all without a single word. And you are learning to measure your own responses, to hold your ground, and to understand that emotional dynamics are rarely about the loudest voice, but the quietest presence. The moment you recognize this, you step out of reactive patterns and into a deeper understanding of connection, one where presence is felt even when absent. If you've ever felt anxious during this phase, stay with me, because what comes next is the part most men completely miss. Now, let's talk about what this silence does to desire and perception, and why most men completely misunderstand it. When both of you stop contacting each other, something subtle happens in her mind. She begins to evaluate the emotional economy of your connection. She notices what she gives and what she receives. And suddenly, without any words, without any explanations, she starts to weigh the value of your presence. This is not manipulative, it's instinctual. Humans are wired to notice absence because it clarifies what was previously taken for granted. That friend, that partner, that presence she relied on, now gone. She experiences the contrast sharply. It's like a mirror. Your absence reflects what she really feels about you, even if she's not ready to admit it aloud. At the same time, silence gives her space to process her own emotions without pressure. If she had been leaning on your energy, your texts, your attention, she now must confront her internal state. And that confrontation often leads to realizations. She might suddenly notice the little things you did consistently. Your calm, your patience, your reliability. Things that seemed invisible when they were constant now stand out. Here's the psychological pivot most men miss. Your absence is not a test for her. It is a test for yourself. Notice how easy it is to fall into old habits. Reaching out too soon, seeking reassurance, or trying to provoke a reaction. Every message you send during this silence communicates something deeper than the words themselves. It communicates whether you are grounded or dependent, confident or anxious, patient or reactive. And she feels it immediately, even if she never says it. So, the dynamic shifts. You are no longer just an active participant in the connection. You are a presence she thinks about. And thought is more powerful than contact. Thought creates longing. Thought creates reflection. Thought creates desire that is not dependent on your next message. Many men think the game starts when they text, when they engage, when they act. But the truth is, the real game begins in absence. The silent spaces reveal who holds emotional balance and who reacts impulsively. Here's what matters most. The longer you can remain calm, consistent, and emotionally independent in silence, the more clarity you gain both about her and about yourself. And clarity is magnetic. Women sense it. They are drawn to it because it signals emotional strength and stability. But remember, this is not about creating drama or testing her. It's about honoring your own emotional state, letting space do the work that constant communication often hides, and allowing both of you to reflect on what truly matters. Soon, you'll see patterns emerge. Subtle behaviours, shifts in tone, the small ways she may reach out, or the ways she reacts to shared spaces. Observing these patterns without forcing an outcome is where insight turns into advantage, not in manipulation, but in understanding. And that understanding is where most men fail because they stop observing and start reacting. The next section will reveal why reactions are your greatest risk and how to avoid them entirely. Let's explore what often happens next. The emotional ripple that follows when silence stretches over days, even weeks. When neither of you reaches out, she starts to feel a subtle tension that she cannot ignore. It's not anger, and it's not resentment. It's curiosity mixed with reflection. She begins to measure the connection, not by
what was said, but by what remains unsaid. And in that unsaid space, she begins to feel your presence more than ever before. Here's something most men overlook. Women experience absence as a signal of emotional reality. If you were always available, always reachable, always predictable, your presence may have been comforting, but also invisible. When the constant disappears, the brain starts to fill in the missing pieces. That's why a pause in contact can evoke feelings that words never did. During this phase, she may find herself thinking of you at unexpected moments. A song, a scent, a memory. She may reflect on the way you handled situations, the calmness you displayed, the subtle gestures she once ignored. All of this happens quietly, internally, without any prompting from you. Meanwhile, the temptation to break the silence can be intense. Most men feel a surge of anxiety, a need to re-establish control, to reaffirm the connection. But here's the crucial point. Reacting impulsively during this time rarely helps. It communicates insecurity and dependency. Even if your intention is simply to reconnect, emotional balance is not just about silence, it's about self-regulation. How well can you remain grounded when uncertainty is at its peak? How well can you allow her the space to process without inserting yourself prematurely into her thoughts? These questions define the outcome far more than any message, call, or gesture could. The truth is, the longer you can maintain calm, the more compelling your presence becomes. Paradoxically, through absence, you are no longer just a person in her life. You become a figure she must account for emotionally, someone whose energy she notices, even when you are not there. At the same time, this silence forces mutual reflection. She is reflecting on her attachment to you, her emotional investment, and her expectations. You are reflecting on your own values, boundaries, and what you truly need in a connection. This is why moments of non-can't often feel heavier than moments of confrontation. They are subtle but profound. And here's the quiet revelation many men miss. The real game is not about winning her back or making her chase you. The real game is understanding the emotional ecosystem between you two. Your patterns, hers, and how they intersect. When you grasp that, you are no longer reacting blindly. You are observing, learning, and acting with intentionality. When the right moment comes, this phase is delicate. If handled poorly, it breeds confusion. If handled wisely, it fosters attraction, respect, and emotional clarity. And that clarity is the foundation for the next stage. The stage where your presence, even after silence, becomes unmistakably magnetic, is now. Let's examine the turning point, the moment where absence becomes a form of presence. This is subtle, and it often goes unnoticed until it's too obvious to ignore. When neither of you has reached out for days, she begins to reconstruct her perception of you. She is piecing together memories, evaluating behaviors, and noticing patterns she once dismissed. Her mind is replaying not just what you said, but how you made her feel. That emotional imprint, calm, confident, consistent, starts to grow in significance because the distraction of daily contact is gone. This is where many men fail. They think action is required. They assume that to regain influence, they must send a message, call, or post something to remind her they exist. But the truth is, action without self-containment is noise. True presence is felt without effort, without validation. She may notice subtle indicators of your life continuing, your calmness, your routines, your independence, and these speak louder than words ever could. What's happening psychologically is fascinating. Silence forces the brain to examine emotional investment. She begins to ask herself, do I want to reach out? Did I take him for granted? Am I missing his presence? And while she is asking these questions, you are not pushing her. You are simply existing in a balanced way, letting the natural pull of connection do the work. At the same time, this period is revealing for you. You are learning the difference between attachment and desire, between need and appreciation. You see how your sense of worth is independent of immediate responses. You discover that attraction and respect are not built on constant interaction, but on emotional consistency, integrity, and grounded presence. Here is the quiet power of this moment. Absence sharpens awareness. She notices what is unique about you. She feels what was overlooked when you were easily available, and you begin to see who she is when the immediate gratification of attention is removed. This phase exposes the true dynamics of your connection, the parts that were hidden by routine, habit, or expectation. It's important to emphasize that this is not a game or a trick. Authenticity is essential. You are not withholding to manipulate. You are withholding because you are emotionally centered and self-contained. And that authenticity, calm, patient, grounded, communicates far more than any message ever could. When she finally reaches out, or when the dynamic naturally shifts, the energy is different. The connection has been recalibrated. There is curiosity, reflection, and often a stronger mutual respect. Because this time apart has revealed emotional truths, what she values, what you value, and how resilient both of you are emotionally. By understanding this, you are not just navigating silence, you are mastering the unspoken language of emotional presence. And this mastery is rare, and it is magnetic. The final stage brings everything full circle, showing you the profound psychological reason why this silence phase changes everything. Now let's bring everything together. The final, often overlooked truth about what happens when you both stop contacting each other. By this point, the silence has done its work. It has revealed patterns, exposed emotional dependencies, and clarified the balance of your connection. She has reflected on your presence consciously or unconsciously, and you have reflected on your own emotional resilience. This is where clarity emerges, and with clarity comes a subtle but powerful shift in perception. Here's the most important insight. Absence does not create love or desire by itself. What it does is reveal truth. It reveals who values whom, who is emotionally anchored, and who is relying on momentum rather than mutual investment. In that revelation, she begins to see you not just as someone who reaches out, but as someone whose presence carries weight even when quiet. That realization is magnetic because it is real. Meanwhile, you have learned something equally profound. You have learned that emotional strength is not measured by how often you communicate, how many messages you send, or how quickly you respond. It is measured by your ability to remain centered, grounded, and authentic in the face of uncertainty. You have discovered that attraction is amplified not by chasing, but by maintaining your own life, your own rhythm, your own calm presence. This stage is not about control or manipulation. It is about alignment. Silence has aligned the connection with truth. It has clarified emotional investment. It has allowed both of you to reflect, to notice, and to recalibrate. And if you have held your center, you have positioned yourself as someone who is confident, emotionally mature, and self-aware. Qualities that are inherently attractive. So what does she feel now? She may feel curiosity. She may feel a subtle longing. She may feel respect for your emotional consistency. And she may also feel her own emotional gaps more clearly. The way she depended on you or overlooked you when constant contact made everything seem ordinary. This awareness is powerful because it is not forced. It emerges naturally through the absence. And you feel clear. You understand that emotional dynamics are not controlled by words alone, but by presence, patience, and authenticity. You have learned that the real game was never about proving yourself or making her react. It was about observing, understanding, and maintaining your own center while the natural rhythms of attraction unfolded. In this quiet space, both of you have been tested, not by manipulation, not by conflict, but by the simple, profound force of absence. And in that test, the truth of your connection emerges stronger, clearer, and more magnetic than any effortful pursuit ever could. So remember this: silence is not empty, it is full of meaning. It is a mirror, it is a teacher. And if you approach it with calm, patience, and emotional maturity, it will reveal more about your connection and yourself than words. Thank you for watching. If you found this video, please like and subscribe my channel.